Good morning. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be doing solving by factoring. So we're going to be talking about what we did last week on Friday and putting it all together. So I'm going to be solve by factoring. So what we were working on last Friday is we were talking about the X factor and the area models and how they correlated with each other. So we're going to talk about that and we're going to put it in notes so we don't forget. So what those two have relate is they tell us how to factor a quadratic or a parabola. So quadratics are always in something called standard form, which you will see as ax squared plus bx plus c. So this is standard form of a quadratic. You'll get to know quadratics a lot more next year in Math 3. But for now, this is what we're working with. So what we're going to do is we learn that the X factor undoes this. So I'm going to draw my area model because my area model is going to help me out. And I know from Friday, we're working with two different things, something times something and something times something. Well, we know we can fill in some of these from the information we have here. I'm going to do it very generally, and then I'm going to do it with an example. So this is just an overview. So the first thing we know is that whatever this first part of your thing is, whatever ax squared, is going to go in that first box that you have. And whatever the last thing is, the c, is going to go in your last box. This b, when you add these together, it's going to equal whatever that is. And the way we get those numbers is by using our X factor. And remember the rules of our X factor? To get the top, we multiply, and to get the bottom, we add. So just remember that. So what do we put in the X factor? We look up here. I put my C in the top, and I put whatever my B is in the bottom. And then this is where you have to find these two sides. And whatever those two sides are, you would put in here. So then your final step would be like, okay, so what goes on these outsides? And whatever goes on those outsides is going to lead you to your factored form. So that's probably like, what the heck are you talking about? That's just a whole bunch of letters and like, this is math, where are the numbers? I just wanted to show you the general form. So we're going to see what this looks like with numbers. And it's going to make a lot more sense because you actually did this on Friday already. So when we're factoring and solving, so solving, I'm lazy, so I'm going to put quads instead of quadratics. One thing that has to be true is that your ax squared plus bx plus c has to equal 0. The reason it must equal 0 is because when we learned those different names, we knew there were x-intercepts, roots, solutions, and zeros. And it has to equal 0 to be able to find the zeros. So let's try this. Let's do some with some numbers. So example 1, say we had x squared plus 8x plus 15 equals 0. All right, I'm going to use my X factor and my box. So I'm going to draw my box over here. Oops, I made it too small, whatever. And I'm going to draw my X factor over here. So I know the first thing. I know my C goes on my top here, so I have 15 here. And I also know that it goes in my box, my area model. So I can put those things where they need to go. I also know that my B goes down here, that 8, and that these two things will have to equal 8. And then lastly, I know that this little part here, this x squared goes here. So that was just me taking all the information from my initial equation and just putting them places. So notice 15 is the only thing that shows up twice. So now we're going to do our X factor. Remember our pattern? We're looking for what two numbers multiply to 15 and add to 8. If you're having trouble thinking of numbers, I like to write out the factors. So I know 1 times 15 equals 15. 2 times, nope. 3 times, okay, yeah. 3 times 5 equals 15. 4 times, no. 5 times, already have that here. So in this case, we only have 2 options to choose from. And I know it has to be 3 and 5 because 1 plus 15 doesn't give me 8, but 3 plus 5 gives me 8. So these are the 2 things that are going to go into my box. Just note when you put them in your box, the thing that's a little weird that you might forget is you need to add an X. And the reason why you want to add the X is because remember the equals that 8X. But you get the numbers from your X factor. The very last part to be like, all right, did we factor this? Did we get this? Is we need to figure out what are the tops of this box. So you're kind of doing that reverse area model. So I'm thinking, okay, what times what gives me X squared? Well, I only have an X there, so it has to be X times X. Then I'm thinking X times what gives me 3X? Oh, that has to be X times 3. And then you're thinking again, X times what gives you 5X? X times 5. And you can check, does 3 times 5 give you 15? It does. So your factored form, you use these 2 things. And I would have X plus 3, and then I would have X plus 5. And that is factored form. The very last thing here, if you wanted to solve, say I was like, okay, now tell me what the zeros are. You want to think about, remember when we were doing our parabola features, how we got the zeros from this. And we got the zeros by setting each term equal to 0 and solving. So in this case, my X would be -3 and -5, because I would subtract to get the X alone. Just a hint, I'm going to make this easier for you, is I wanted to show you the box method so you know exactly where it comes from. But because we're going to be only working when A is 1, you'll be doing more complicated things next year. You can skip this step and it still works. Let me show you what I mean by that. So for example 2, we have X squared plus 2X minus 35 equals 0. I'm going to go straight to my X factor. So straight to my X. I know my C value. So over here's my C value. Has to go on my top. And I know my B value goes on my bottom. And I'm trying to see what 2 numbers multiply to -35 and add to 2. Again, if you're like, ooh, miss, the struggle, write out the factors. 1 and 35. 2, I think 3 does not go into it. 4 does not. 5 does. 5 and 7. 6 doesn't. these are actually the only factors. And if you're having trouble finding the factors, like in your head, like I just did, literally just take 35 and start dividing by numbers in order, like divide it by 2, divide it by 3, divide it by 4, and see whenever you get a whole number, say you divided it by 5, your answer would be 7, you know those are factors. So we have these two choices, but if we add 5 and 7 and 1 and 35, we don't get 2. But remember, we want a negative here. So that means that one of these numbers has to be negative. So I know that 2 means there has to be a small difference. So if I subtracted these, this would be a huge difference. But these, it wouldn't be as big. The 2 is positive, so I know 7 minus 5, that would give me 2. Up here, we put it back into that box and figured out these tops. But because A is 1, we can go straight into our factored form from here. We can go straight into x minus 5 and x plus 7. See how we had x plus 3 and x plus 5 up here? When you're working when A equals 1, you can skip this step and go straight to here. If you're like, ooh, that's a little confusing, I like this step so I can visualize it, definitely keep doing it. But I wanted to show you that there was an option to skip it if you think about that and you like it easier. So we're going to be playing around with this. We're going to be getting a lot of practice. You should be able to do it in your sleep by the end of class today. So I hope you have fun with what we're doing for the rest of the day. Why is it